Hello, MCU fans! Today's going to be my breakdown and review of the new Fantastic Four movie, including Easter eggs, ending explained, post-credit scenes, and more. There will be lots of spoilers, but as long as you're okay with that, then let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have a July contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, you could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out in case you're interested. Plus, hang around to the end of the video, and we'll talk about the Doomsday Countdown rewatch on the Discord. Alright, so the movie starts with the very unique and creative new Marvel Studios logo. It also firmly establishes that the universe is 828, and that's in honor of Jack Kirby, who was one of the co-creators of the Fantastic Four, and his birthday was on August 28th, so I love that. So if you watched any of my trailer breakdowns, you know I broke the movie into 8 key scene groupings that I thought was the overall flow of the movie. And I'm gonna, assess how well I did. I got a lot right, but I got some wrong. But I do want to point out I have a separate timeline video if you want to know the months and years when all the main scenes are happening. And in fact, I broke it down a little differently for that. But for this video, we're gonna stick to these to see how I did. And we'll start right off with the Baxter Tour section, which I thought for sure was going to be in the movie because, well, it was in the trailers, right? We see the Baxter building here. Here's another nice shot of the Baxter building and their spaceship right behind. How convenient, right? Here's a shot of a helicopter approaching it from behind. And then they did open the movie with this shot. It's beautiful, a nighttime shot of the building and the spaceship. But if you remember from the trailers, we got this really cool tour of the Baxter building. Sue did the tour saying, "Welcome to the Baxter building." We even had this logo for it, a tour of the Baxter building with Sue Storm. And this is where Reed introduced the concept of making a point to do a family dinner every week. Sunday at 7 on the dot, no matter what, we're all here. Now, obviously, this was not in the movie at all, and I know that there were some theories that Sue was actually pregnant here, had a baby bump that they CGI'd out. I think those theories were probably right, because Matt Shakman gave an interview to Entertainment Weekly and said for a long time the baby was born at the beginning of the movie. And then we realized it would be wonderful to see the baby proofing and the preparation and to see them getting ready for the child. So moving Franklin's birth to the midpoint was something we decided to do, which also then allowed me to combine it with some other of those moments. So I think she actually was shown as pregnant in this scene. They CGI'd it out and then decided, you know what? It just doesn't work. And so they nuked it from the movie. That's crazy. That's just crazy. We do, though, in the movie see a brief scene with Reed and Sue walking into the Baxter building in their uniforms, but not that tour of the Baxter building by Sue. I'll also point out, I don't think these two shots showed up in the movie. Let me know your thoughts. I don't remember them. They're really cool, though. I would have loved to know what was planned for this scene had it been in the movie. All right, so that's the Baxter Tour section. Then the next one I got wrong is Risky Work. But in fairness, I made this a section because of this line from the trailers, which wasn't in the movie. Reed says, "It's my fault. I stretched the bounds of space, and they heard." Like, what on earth? Why was this in the trailers? And what would this have meant to the movie had it actually been in the movie? Was there a plot in the movie at some point where Reed was actually responsible for the surfer choosing Earth? I would love to know why these lines were in and also why they were cut. But while we're here, let's talk about Reed's different rooms. So Entertainment Weekly did an article explaining them, and this is the Red Room. The Red Room is for research with tables full of inventions. Then we also have the Yellow Room. Now the Yellow Room is for thinking, and thus it's filled with blackboards covered with complex equations. And then finally we have the Blue Room. And the Blue Room is for monitoring, complete with sophisticated screens and communication equipment. So I think it's really cool that Reed has one floor of the Baxter building with all these sections laid out. So let's also talk about what we learned from his chalkboard. So the movie definitely features wormholes, but this one's interesting because it actually has another universe written there, implying that maybe he could use that to jump between universes. In fact, he also has the Penrose diagram. This is a very famous diagram showing how you can use a black hole to jump between universes. Then we also see him crossing out some formulas here, not really sure what this represents, but later we see another Penrose diagram. And we also see what looks like hexes, maybe organic compounds. This is maybe how he came up with the concept of unstable molecules, which of course their costumes are made out of. And then we also see Reed during his Fantastic Science with Mr. Fantastic show explaining that this equation not only confirms alternate dimensions, but suggests that parallel Earths exist on different dimensional planes. And if we look closely at his chalkboard, you can see some diagrams that do seem to show parallel Earths on different dimensional planes. And I think that's very similar to the Beast in the Marvels talking about parallel realities, and of course He Who Remains talking about stacked universes. And speaking of black holes, we saw Darben in the Marvels use the bangles to open a rift in space, and if we look really closely, you can see a black hole right there in the center that forms, and then the rift is finally open. So, yeah, everything on his chalkboard is indicating that he understands that there are parallel Earths on different dimensional planes, and that a black hole might be the way to go between them. I will definitely be talking more about this in later videos. Then there's another line that was in the trailers but was cut from the movie where he says alien life was always a foregone conclusion. So that's interesting. But then finally he decides, all right, the kids don't care about this. Who wants to see a big explosion? Love that. And then let's talk a little bit more about things we see in his office. Notice this here? That has got to be a tesseract, which means he is experimenting with fourth dimensional space. Very cool. Then I love the retro-futurism that's so similar to Loki's series. Like, notice this monitor here. That looks a lot like the monitors we see in the movie. And then I think this hourglass symbol here looks suspiciously like the hourglass/infinity symbol that we see at the TVA. And even the alert symbols on their watches looks like the text that we saw in the Loki series. So, I don't know, this may all have been coincidental, or maybe they're trying to indicate there's some connection between 828 and the eventual TVA that gets formed. We'll have to wait and see. So this is the second section I had that really didn't appear in the movie. Then it's also worth noting that, as I suspected, First Flight and the 4 years sections were basically combined. So we're going to cover those together. All right, so we start with the fact that Reed and Sue are pregnant after 2 years of trying. Sue says we can do this, nothing's going to change, and of course, everything's going to change. So then we see that they're celebrating the team's 4-year anniversary with a special ABC presentation. And while I do have a longer video on the timeline, I will point out it's in 1964. That's when the main part of the movie is happening. So yeah, they're celebrating 4 years of the Fantastic Four. We see that on this marquee in front of the Ted Gilbert Show. And Marvel also released an in-universe comic. I did a video on that if you're interested. And in fact, gave us an in-universe announcement for the comic that the Future Foundation within, 828, in July, in coordination with Marvel Comics, is releasing the comic just in time for the 4th anniversary of the Fantastic Four's public debut to our world. So yeah, Marvel Comics actually exists in the movie. And in fact, in the comics, Marvel Comics exists. Because in Fantastic Four Annual number 3, down in the lower left-hand corner there, you can see Jack Kirby and Stan Lee being kicked out of the Fantastic Four's wedding. Too funny. So I will be referencing the in-universe comic while I go through the movie breakdown, but notice the comic is an homage to the original Fantastic Four number 1. And then a cool Easter egg in the movie is we see a reference to Timely Comics. Now, IRL, Timely Comics became Marvel Comics, so I'm betting in the movies universe, the same thing happened, and they're honoring their past here. And then I think these two guys are meant to be an homage to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, which is very, very cool. All right, so back to the Ted Gilbert Show, which is honoring the team. And I will mention the Ted Gilbert Show is most definitely patterned after the Ed Sullivan Show, which of course was around in the 60s. But Ted says, well, folks, we all know the story. And then we see the flashbacks of their first flight. He says 4 brave astronauts head up into space and come back forever changed. I love all this cool footage we get of them. This is the Excelsior launch control. Notice their ship is called Excelsior, which was Stan Lee's catchphrase. T-minus 3 hours, 42 minutes, and 19 seconds. Kiss for luck. I thought that was really cute. And then they're getting ready for takeoff, but hey, there's always time for a pose. Notice more of the retrofuturism because we see these old school looking computers. And then notice their patch as well. It has their names on it, Richard, Storm, Storm, and Grimm. We also see them in this group shot, paying homage to this famous comic cover. So a couple more shots as they're getting ready for takeoff, and then finally it's time to launch. So they wave a little goodbye, and then now we're going to turn to the comic where we see them taking off on that first flight and in fact getting hit by the cosmic rays. Now it's interesting, the comic actually calls it celestial radiation, so I wondered if maybe there was going to be some tie to the Celestials. But instead, the movie sticks with it being a cosmic storm, and in fact, Franklin himself ends up getting the power cosmic. So let me know your thoughts on that, but I don't think there's any tie with the Celestials. All right, so then upon return to Earth, they discover their powers. Here's the Thing busting out a door, and in fact, we see all of them discovering their powers. So then they need to head into quarantine. Notice Reed explains our period of self-quarantine allowed us to better understand how our physiognomies had changed while ensuring we were not a danger to anyone else. But they do end up leaving quarantine to fight the Mole Man and his creatures. And notice they're wearing their original costumes there before they switch to the ones in the movie. Of course, we also saw this during the Little Caesars commercial. I don't know, which one's better, right? Neither one are that great. I don't think it was meant to look that good, to be honest. Then we also see the Pan Am building sinking down, which the comic featured as well. The Mole Man basically sunk it down underground. And then Ben definitely lives to regret saying this. He just shouts out it's clobbering time as they're fighting the Mole Man. And Johnny's like, wait a minute, what did he say? And they try to refocus Johnny, but he's like, no, seriously, what did he just say? And in fact, at the end of the comic, he's still saying, hey, it's clobbering time. And Ben's like, shut up. And then the joke continues on as the animated version of Ben in the movie uses the phrase, it's clobbering time. And of course, this is an homage to that Fantastic Four cartoon where, of course, he also said, it's clobbering time. So they do actually tell us when this Mole Man battle takes place. Notice this medallion honoring the battle where it says, on this place, on this day, the Four saved the city, a grateful city honors the Four. And it was on the 8th of August, which is definitely paying homage to the original Fantastic Four comic, which came out August 8th. And then, of course, we have those original Galactus stories from the 60s that were also adapted for the movie. All right, so now back to the comic where we see that Sue has found common ground with the Mole Man, a.k.a. Harvey Elder. He just wants recognition, prosperity, and the right to exist. And sure enough, Subterranea and the surface world now learn to live in peace. And then we see that Sue founds the Future Foundation, which brings together all the different countries of the world to work peacefully together. Well, almost all the countries, because we do see that Dr. Doom's seat is noticeably empty, although we do see his flags in one of the shots in the movie. So I wonder if this is hinting at the fact that the Dr. Doom that's going to show up in Doomsday is from 828. Let me know your theories on that, but I'm kind of thinking so, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the post-credit scene. So once again, Sue founds the Future Foundation, and in fact, in that tie-in comic, we even get a letter from, well, Lynn Nichols herself, the chief of staff of the Future Foundation. So that was really cool. And of course, Lynn appears in the movie multiple times. Now, it's worth noting that in the Marvel Comics universe, the Future Foundation is actually like a big think tank with tons of heroes and even some villains in it. But of course, in the movie, 828 only has the Fantastic Four. It's also worth noting that the Future Foundation seems to have planted a flag on the moon, because we see that later in the movie. So then the movie goes on to show us some of the adventures of the Fantastic Four, and so honestly, I'm still not sure what Reed is doing here. I mean, notice he's landing on the Four. That is their space shuttle launch pad, but why is it on fire? And then they show a shot which they explain is him fighting the Red Ghost and the Super Apes, but notice on the right, once again, there's that Four of the launch pad. So I'm betting these scenes were somehow connected originally. But anyway, so the Super Ape kicks him back. I love him using his arms to then swing back and punt the ape away. But it's worth noting, he's only fighting the apes. There's no appearance by the Red Ghost. We now know that John Malkovich's role was cut from the movie, and he was going to play the Red Ghost, from the comics. So really curious to know what was going on here, and I hope we get a deleted scene telling us the fire, the apes, and we finally get to see John Malkovich himself. So then we get this shot of Ben rescuing a boat stuck in the harbor. Notice he shouts cannonball as he jumps in the water and pulls the boat to shore, and then takes time to ask a little doggy how his day is going. That's so cute. All right, so then we get Johnny the firefighter as he literally sucks the fire out of these buildings. Really cool usage of his powers. We get the fireman thanking him for his efforts, to which he salutes back and then creates his famous Four in the sky, something we've seen in the comics and that they used in the promo art as well. Then he seems to be heading off for his next emergency, and I still want to know what this thing was. We've seen it in many shots in the movie, but they don't explain it, so oh well. It looks like an alien to me, but kind of cool. So yeah, he takes off, and we see him flying by this copper tone ad, of course paying homage to the famous one from the 60s, but that is just hilarious. All right, so then we see this giant explosion, but we also see this advertisement for another innovative product brought to you by Reed Tech. I mean, it totally makes sense that he would market and patent his stuff because they need money to build that Baxter Tower. That's not cheap. But so this explosion then leads to this 7-Up ball falling down and almost crushing these people, but thank goodness Sue is there to rescue them. And then I think all of this is tied to the dual explosions that we see, and the movie explains it's the mad thinker who tries to sabotage New York. So I'd love to know what his plan was. What was he trying to accomplish here? But anyway, here's another explosion. I think that's also tied to this girder from the overhead monorail falling down, and this little girl running in to grab her thing doll and almost getting crushed, but luckily the Human Torch comes flying in, grabs her. I think it's kind of cool how he's reduced his flames so that he obviously doesn't torch the little girl, and then he rescues her to safety. So then we see Sue jumping into action. Notice the Fantastic Car back there, but she uses their powers to then lift that girder up and replace it, and then in comes Johnny, who solders it quickly, just in time so the monorail doesn't derail. That's just crazy. All right, so then we see the Fantastic Car heading off to an emergency. Notice that they basically brand everything. There's their Four. And then also notice this little doohickey up in the sky. I'm pretty sure this is a drone, which maybe patrols the city, maybe even the world, to let them know about emergencies that they need to address. And then we see the Fantastic Car taking off into the sky, and I absolutely love this like flying robot thing walking the dog, and hopefully picking up the waste afterwards, right? Anyway, then we see the Fantastic Car heading off to take care of another emergency. Then we see the team is incredibly popular. Look at all these magazine covers and newspapers, and there are so many cool Easter eggs. So first of all, this says Quantum Realm 101 and Gamma Ray Unusual Side Effects. Nice. Then we also see Epic Showdown Fantastic Four defeat the Mastermind Mad Thinker. Of course, they talked about the Mad Thinker earlier. And then here's a reference to the Mole Man and that Pan Am, which the Mole Man sunk underground. And then we're reminded that this is celebrating 4 years of the Fantastic Four. So we get a bunch of people saying, thank you, Fantastic Four, this lady, these kids, the firefighters, the dude lifting up the mug in support. And then this is really cool. Notice the foursome there on the right. That is the original cast of the 1994 unreleased Fantastic Four movie. And I say unreleased because I actually did a video on it and got copyright struck. So it's the only time I've ever been copyright struck, but they do not want people to see this movie. Now this image, that's okay. That's a promo image. But beyond that, I'm not showing anything about the movie. Anyway, the team now makes their big appearance on the Ted Gilbert Show. Please welcome the Fantastic Four. Obviously, the crowd goes wild, and there they are. Now, they don't look that excited to be there. I mean, look at these faces. They're like, please, anywhere else but here. I am so bored. But then I really love this pose of them all standing on the podium because that's paying homage to the Beatles, who first appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show on a very similar looking podium. Then I find this really interesting. This was definitely cut from the movies because in the trailers, we see them look down, they see these alerts on their watches, they're like, oh crap, we got to get out of here. So they go booking it out of the show. Notice over on the right, you can see the next act standing there. So then outside, we see that marquee celebrating 4 years of the Fantastic Four. So they come running out. Johnny Storm just takes off in the air, headed for I don't know where. I don't think this shot right here was in the movie. I could be wrong. Let me know if I forgot it and missed it. But anyway, back to them getting in the car. Notice they jump in, Ben gets behind the wheel, and they take off. And he's driving away. So none of this was in the movie, but I think originally they left the Ted Gilbert Show and went to solve this disaster, which seems to be the Mad Thinker. So yeah, they definitely reworked some things in that opening act, and I really, really hope we get some nice deleted scenes showing us what it would have been like. So that's a combination of the sections I was calling First Flight and, of course, their 4-year celebration. So after this, I think I pretty much got everything right in my trailer breakdowns because now we move to the You're Late segment. All right, so we finally get to meet Herbie. He's cooking dinner, and in fact, he's making sure to follow the recipe, right? But so Herbie stands for Humanoid Experimental Robot B-Type Integrated Electronics. Of course, he first appeared in the cartoon in the 70s and actually replaced the Human Torch in that cartoon because there was some type of contracting issues where they couldn't use the Human Torch. But anyway, yeah, he was part of this Fantastic Four cartoon and then eventually showed up in the comics and now finally in the movies. So, love it. So yeah, Herbie is cooking dinner, but Ben wants to make sure it's perfect. And this has to be an Easter egg to the fact that Eben Moss-Baccarat, who plays the Thing, was also in The Bear, of course, a show about cooking. But I gotta say, the Thing looked so good in this movie. I mean, compare him to these previous iterations, and yeah, this one wins, hands down. I mean, looks so much like the comics. It was just perfect. Plus, gotta point out the landline over there. Oh my goodness, haven't seen one of those in ages. But again, more of this retrofuturism. All right, so the Thing will decide if it's ready or not. He says, I'll be the judge of that. He's like, okay, this guy's good, right? He's good. But it still needs a little garlic. So he smashes the garlic with his fist, but he doesn't do it because it's not delicious. Poor little Herbie. Poor Herbie. And then we see that Johnny is getting hungry. So he just grabs a box of cereal. We'll see that again in just a second. But I got to point out Kix. I love Kix. I know a lot of people hate it, think it's boring, but I just think it's so good. So good. Anyway, notice the box on the back. It actually has a pinup page from the original Fantastic Four comics. I thought that's such a cool detail. And we're going to later see that I think there's a prize in there of a little Johnny Storm. So hold on to that thought. We'll see that a little later. But anyway, they realize Reed and Sue are late. It's 7 o'clock, it's Sunday night, and they're not here. So finally, when they show up, he shouts out, "You're late." And then their reactions basically give them away because they're like, "What do you mean?" And Johnny's like, "What do you mean, what do I mean? You're late for dinner." They're like, yeah, that's it. We're late for dinner. But Ben's too smart. He's like, "Are you pregnant?" Johnny's like, "What?" So now it's time to celebrate. "You're going to be the best mom in the world," gives her a big hug, and looks at Reed and says, "You, however, are out of your depth." But he says, we're going to be the best uncles ever. And then I think this is hilarious. Notice, Ben is in his Fantastic Four outfit here, but in another one of the trailers, he was in his regular clothes. So it's really interesting to see how they CGI'd some things out of the trailers to maybe fool us. But yeah, so they now decide to celebrate the good news. I hope that's water, Sue, and not wine. And then we even get this fist bump with Herbie. So I love it. So now the news is official, and everyone wants to know, will the baby be born with superpowers? Oh, I think that answer is most definitely yes. I mean, in the comics, at one point he defeated Galactus. At another point, he literally made Galactus his herald. And in the 2015 version of Secret Wars in the comics, he helped recreate the multiverse. So for sure, he's going to play a big role in Secret Wars in the MCU, which will result in the recreation of the multiverse as we head into Phase 7. That is going to be so much fun to see. All right, so then we see two very important plot elements that will come into play later in the movie. First of all, Reed is building a teleportation device, and we see him teleporting this egg across the room, but unfortunately, it uses way too much power and short circuits the fuses. And then also we see that Johnny is listening to deep space transmissions, and eventually that's how he's going to be able to decode the Silver Surfer's language. So very cool. All right, so those are the things in the section You're Late. Now we move to Surfer's Warning. All right, so now we jump several months forward as they're preparing for the baby's arrival. This is Herbie putting safety caps on the outlets, and we see Herbie is also building the crib because Sue walks in and is a little surprised that Reed has delegated it to Herbie, but notice she is very, very pregnant. So she goes in to talk to Reed about why he's not the one building the crib, but then they do this really cool ultrasound trick where she turns her belly invisible enough so they can see the baby. What an interesting idea. She is the best ultrasound around. All right, so then we see Ben going out for a walk on Yancey Street, and in fact, it's Halloween time, and they're all shouting out to him, "What time is it? Say the thing." And he's like, "That's not really something I say." They're like, "It's clobbering time." And he's like, "That's just in the cartoon." I love this running joke throughout the movie. Then we see that Ben is entertaining a group of kids. They all shout, "Lift the car, lift the car." And he's like, "This car?" Sure enough, goes over to lift it up. But notice we do see this Stan Lee's Service Center. I'm sure that's an homage to Stan Lee, of course, the co-creator of the Fantastic Four. And then as he lifts the car over his head, I can't help but wonder if that's not an homage to Action Comics #1. And then here's our confirmation that he is indeed on Yancey Street. Yancey Street was very important to his character in the comics. They were always playing pranks on him whenever he went down that street, and he even teamed up with them once in Marvel 2-in-1. So yeah, Ben is having a lot of fun entertaining the kids, and notice when he sets the car down, we get another indication of what year the movie is taking place. It says New York, Empire State, and then 1964. And then we meet Rachel Rosman, who's a new character created for the movie and maybe is going to become Ben's love interest, I guess replacing Elisa Masters, the blind sculptor from the comics. I wasn't really sure where they were going with this. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But she's played by Natasha Lyonne, which certainly raised rumors that her Birdie character from What If might be what's appearing in Fantastic Four, but obviously no connection to her character there. All right, so then we move to nighttime, and we see Ben walking around in his trench coat, something we often saw in the comics, and Ben is watching footage of their first trip into space. Reed says, "Best pilot in the world right here," and Ben says, yeah, best looking he means. So they didn't really play a lot on this idea that Ben didn't like being, all rocky, but there were moments where you could tell that he was sad about it. So then we move back up to the Baxter building where we see Herbie frantically carving a pumpkin because I do believe this is Halloween night, so he's a little late to the game here. And then Johnny walks up with his little Human Torch toy, which I'm betting he got out of that Lucky Charms box. He says, "Flame on," and Ben's like, "No, flame off," and blows out the smoke. Love that. Then we learn that Reed has been tracking criminal organizations for the last few months. He's basically trying to baby-proof the city. And he name drops Puppet Master, Wizard, and Diablo. So very nice. In fact, we're going to see them showing up in the final post-credit scene again. And then we get another reminder of why Ben truly regrets that clobbering time phrase as Johnny says, "Hey, what time is it?" And he grumbles out, "It's dinner time." But no dinner for them because their watches give them an alert. Of course, if they would just turn around, they would see in the sky that everything is turning bright red, and that is not good. So Johnny decides, okay, I better go check this out. He flies off into the sky and runs headfirst into the Silver Surfer. Yikes. So everybody heads back down to street level to see what she has to say. Of course, there's that medallion, by the way, that honors their battle with the Mole Man on August 8th. And then this is the evidence that probably it's Halloween night because people are dressed up for Halloween. And the surfer then gives her big announcement. We see her on the Jumbotron, and there she is right there, too. I think that's a really cool visual. But she says, "Are you the protectors of the world?" Sue jumps in with, "Yes, we are." And she says, "Your planet is now marked for death." I love this speech as she explains your world will be consumed by the devourer. There is nothing you can do to stop him, for he is a universal force as essential as the stars. And if we take a quick pause here, it is worth noting there's some people dressed up for Halloween. We have a witch here, and I guess we have a witch here. I mean, her hat is a Wheaties box. Like, what is up with that? Reminds me of the Adam Sandler low-budget costumes that he would come up with on SNL. I mean, honestly, crazy newspaper face, that's not much worse than crazy Wheaties hat witch. I'm just saying. Anyway, back to the speech. She says, hold your loved ones close and speak the words you've been afraid to speak. Use this time to rejoice and celebrate, for your time is short. I herald his beginning. I herald your end. I herald Galactus. Fantastic speech. Absolutely loved it. But I think Johnny is enthralled by more than just the speech. He's seeming to already be smitten by the surfer herself. We'll see more of that as we move on. So the surfer decides it's time to head out and literally phases through this helicopter as she flies into the sky, and the Human Torch is in hot pursuit. But before we leave this scene, I want to point out 2 Easter eggs over here. The first is Westview Appliance Television, which is obviously a wink and a nod to WandaVision, which was also directed by Matt Shakman. And the second is this movie, Attack of the Fungi, which clearly is a wink and a nod to The Last of Us, which stars Pedro Pascal. So yeah, Johnny is taking off after the surfer and actually reaches her, grabs her board, and then they have a moment, right? She's staring at him, and he's staring back at her. But ultimately, she punts him off the surfboard as he starts to fall down to earth, and I still think this is wild. One of the trailers actually had this backdrop being in the daytime. So did they change their minds on this scene and ultimately go with nighttime? I'm just really curious about that. So yeah, Johnny ultimately falls back down to Earth and heads to the Baxter building, where the team discovers the surfer's connection to Galactus. Basically, everywhere where the surfer has been, the planets are gone. So Reed decides he wants to launch in 16 hours to go and confront Galactus. But Johnny wants their attention first because he thinks he has a bond growing with the surfer. He says, she was right here. I saw stars and I could see me in her face. But when they all start teasing him, he's like, okay, I get it. Johnny loves space, Johnny loves women, and Johnny thinks they had a moment. And so they basically dismiss him, being like, okay. But to her credit, Sue gives Johnny a vote of confidence and goes in to listen to what his idea is. He explains that he thinks he can translate her language if given enough time, and she says, okay, that's actually a good plan. But then she says, Reed has some news for you. So he goes in to learn that Reed has finally knocked something off the list. And Johnny's like, list? And he's like, yeah, the new spacesuits. And Johnny is so excited. This is exactly what he wanted. As he said, he loves space, and he's been wanting to get back up in space again. So Johnny then gives him a big hug and says, I take back every single bad thing I've been saying about you. Reed's like, what? What have you been saying? He's like, well, to myself, in private. But yeah, Johnny is so happy he gets to go to space again. And then I really like this heart-to-heart moment between Ben and Reed. I mean, they don't say a lot, but what I got from this is that Reed is still feeling guilty because the first time they went in space, Ben turned into the Thing, and now they're going up in space again. But Ben's basically saying, I forgive you, I trust you, you have our backs. So really cool scene. And then this is interesting. This seems to have been cut from the movie because I don't remember this dialogue at least. Sue's saying it has to be us. Reed's saying, before we went up the first time, you couldn't turn invisible, Ben wasn't a rock, and Johnny never caught fire. And Sue says, Ben has always been a rock, Johnny is, Johnny, and I'm right here. So I think that's a really cool conversation. Not sure why they cut it, but basically Reed is really worried about going up in space again, especially since Sue, I'm guessing at this point, is about 7 months pregnant. So, okay, that's the scene I was calling Surfer's Warning. So now on to second flight. All right, so we see them getting the ship ready for the big trip. Of course, this is the same platform we've seen with that number 4 on it. And then this little doohickey, I swear it looks like a blue minion. I can't unsee it. That is totally a blue minion. Anyway, love this nice shot of the underbody of the ship. And then speaking of getting things ready for space, notice that Reed is swapping out Herbie's protocols. He goes from the home, domestic and service protocol to the space, flight and exploration protocol. That is so cool. All right, so then Reed gives a vote of confidence to the world as he says, our family faces the danger that has threatened this planet. Today we are your defenders. The 4 of us will face the danger, and we will protect you. So he leaves with a very strong vote of confidence, but we'll see that they don't return with quite so much confidence. Anyway, they're now ready to blast off in their brand new spacesuits, and they head down to the ship, And sure enough, it's time for the launch, and everyone is very excited because they're going to save the world, basically. All right, so off they go. And I love the fact that they're kind of playing around and having some fun along the way. I mean, I'm sure it was a long trip in space. This is a nice shot of him here from Fandango. And then I love that even little Herbie has his own cubby. Aw, so sweet. Okay, so then they dock their spaceship into this faster-than-light engine, which basically allows them to use wormholes for their space travel, very similar to the jump points in the Guardian movies. And sure enough, they arrive at this planet where they have tracked the Silver Surfer. But they did not expect to see this. It's basically being destroyed by Galactus' ship. So yeah, they're like, what is that? I mean, that's what we're all wondering. What is going on? But yeah, it is basically disintegrating the planet and turning it into energy for Galactus to consume. All right, so then they get caught in a red tractor beam and scanned by Galactus. And in fact, Galactus lands on Sue's belly and realizes, ooh, I think I found my prize. So the Surfer then shows up on their ship and says they have an invitation from Galactus. So I'm sure they've got to be a little nervous at this point as they're realizing just how massive Galactus' ship is. I love that they leave their 4 footprint. Branding, baby. Branding is everything. So anyway, as they're heading towards Galactus' ship, Johnny decides to jump ahead and try to charm the Surfer. And he does get one important thing out of her. She translates at least one of her phrases, which is going to be key for him being able to translate all of her language later. But anyway, he ends their conversation by asking whether the surfboard, is that part of your body or is that... And she's like, dude, we are so done with this conversation. So she's like, I'm head out. So then when Johnny gets back to the team, Ben's like, she dumped you already? But of course, Johnny got some very, very important information. Anyway, now they come before Galactus to learn what his very high price is for the Earth's salvation. So he unhooks himself from these machines that allow him to convert the energy from the planet into something he can consume. And he says, I was once a little like you, billions of years ago, a man from another world before this eternal hunger. Okay, so we learn one important thing about Galactus. He is billions of years old, and we'll learn more later. But he also explains why he wants Franklin. He says he possesses the power cosmic, and he will inherit this cursed throne. So they're like, no, he doesn't have the power cosmic. He's a normal baby. And I love this line. Galactus says he hides his nature from you. Oh, my word. So he's basically in Sue's womb. He's not even born yet. And yet he's able to hide his nature from Reed and Sue. That is crazy, crazy. And then Galactus starts to induce Sue's labor to get Franklin, basically to get him right now. Again, I'm guessing she's probably 7 months pregnant, so he's forcing Franklin to come out now. Yikes. So yeah, it's time to get out of Dodge. They escape momentarily from Galactus, get into their ship, and start to fly away. Notice they're carrying Sue over their arms there. Reed screams, get us out of here, Ben. Of course, you can see Sue over there on the left starting to give birth because of Galactus. But the Surfer is in hot pursuit, and this is crazy. She literally tries to pull the baby out of Sue's womb. This is insanity, right? So Ben is then trying to escape from the Surfer, but he's unable to elude her, and I was so shocked. Sue then gives the kill order. Kill her, Johnny. Wow. Wow. So, sure enough, Johnny starts trying to shoot at her, but the Surfer is able to dodge. These scenes were so visually stunning. Oh, my word. And the Surfer is ticked off. So Ben's like, Johnny, quit screwing around. And he's like, I don't tell you how to drive the ship. Don't tell me how to kill sexy aliens. But the bottom line is they're unable to kill her or stop her. So then Reed comes up with an insane idea. He says, trust me. And they're all like, okay, what do you got, man? Well, he literally lures her in towards a black hole and causes her to be stuck long enough that it time dilates her for a month. My word. And they're able to get away. So they basically now have a month while she's stuck and they get back to Earth. Oh, but first, it's time for Sue to give birth to baby Franklin, as though it wasn't crazy enough. So now she's phasing in and out. Finally, they get her to strap down, and sure enough, she delivers a healthy baby Franklin, which, considering everything he's been through, is pretty much a miracle. But then again, he does have the power cosmic. So then they finally arrive back home after what the news reports as being a month-long return trip. We see everybody running to go check out the news, and this is kind of wild. In the trailers, the footage showed the Ted Gilbert show. Of course, you can see their original flight, and there was that mysterious tour of the Baxter building that never actually happened. But in the movie, instead, they were watching them returning from space. So another tricky little trailer shot. Love it. So now we head to the Future Foundation where everyone wants to hear the news. How did it go with Galactus? So notice we see Sue is actually wearing a Future Foundation outfit, changing out of her spacesuit, of course. And the press wants to know what happened. They say, can you take us through how you defeated Galactus? But Reed doesn't know quite what to say. Ben and Johnny are equally speechless until finally Ben says, we didn't. We didn't defeat Galactus. Johnny pipes in with not yet. And then Reed explains, we attempted to negotiate, but Galactus, he asked too high a price. Well, what does he want, they ask. And he's honest. He's dead honest with them. He asked for our child. Yikes. So they say, well, just answer this. Are we safe? And he's honest again and says, I don't know. So yeah, this tension that it created, that everybody now knows they would be safe if only the Fantastic Four would have given up their child. Speaking of, Galactus now takes the Surfer to task because she says, I'm sorry, I failed you. And he says, I need the child. He is a being of infinite power, one strong enough to absorb my hunger so I may finally rest. So again, Galactus wants to get rid of this hunger and pass it on to Franklin. And I think this is the first time the Surfer is starting to question if she's doing the right thing, because she's realizing he's just a child. All right, so Reed, on the other hand, has no idea what to do. He says, I analyzed the samples we took from Galactus' ship, and all evidence suggests he predates our universe, our reality. Whoa, okay, so they're taking this directly from the comics, where Galactus literally predates the Big Bang. He's part of a previous cycle of the universe before the current one. Oh my. We will talk about this more in a later video, because that is huge. Okay, so meanwhile, Sue is checking on Johnny, who has been working on translating the Surfer's language. He's like, whoa, hey, hi. So he takes the helmet off, puts it on her head, and lets her hear the work he's been doing, because since the Surfer gave him a translation to one of her phrases when they were on the Galactus' ship, he's now been able to use that to decode her entire language, and that will be important later. All right, so then we get a newscast from who else but WHIH, right? And we see that the world is in a panic, turmoil around the world. And I think this inspired track number 24 on the soundtrack, which we actually hear that during the closing credits in the movie. But notice in the chorus, starving for comfort, starving for peace, let us be whole, let us be devoured. Grace is in your power, mighty tower, take away our pain, let us be devoured. So there must have been some cults that were formed that actually want Galactus to destroy them. Crazy, crazy. But then we also see this discussion on the news. The idea is simple. Hand over the baby and we all live. So yeah, Sue doesn't appreciate that and destroys the TV, but you can imagine this is quite a dilemma that the Fantastic Four are facing. So Reed says, we are going to make it right. But look at these crowds, these angry crowds forming below the Baxter building. They used to love the Fantastic Four and now they hate them. So Sue decides to go and address the crowd herself. I love this. She walks down the row of them. Notice Earth believed in you on that sign in the background. She walks down through them and says, I will not sacrifice my child for this world, but I will not sacrifice this world for my child. That's amazing. She says, we will face this together as a family. Okay. So now the crowd, at least for the minute, is willing to give them a chance. What is your plan? Well, that's the big question, isn't it? What is the plan? So Reed realizes that he can create a teleportation bridge, just like he did with the egg earlier, only he can use it to teleport the entire world. Whoa, that is a mind-blowing plan, to literally teleport the Earth to a different location where Galactus won't be able to find it. But even more mind-blowing is the entire world agrees to it, and in 36 hours work together to build these teleportation devices. However, Reed realizes they need to conserve power, so we basically have a worldwide blackout as they're conserving power for these devices to work. And that's actually the reason why Ben is no longer able to shave his beard. We were all wondering, how does he get this giant beard that we see in the comics also, but how does he get it in the movie? Well, it's because he can't shave anymore because they're conserving power. Love it, love it. Then we also have this really tender moment with Reed and Franklin where he decides to stop trying to understand everything. He says, the more I look at you, the less I know. And the less I know, the more scared I am. But he finally realizes, I'm going to stop trying to figure out who you are, and I'm going to let you tell me who you are. And it's just beautiful, beautiful scene. In fact, we have a lot of tender moments with Reed and Sue looking at little baby Franklin as they're getting ready to enact this crazy, crazy plan. All right, so that was Second Flight. And now it's time for the final grouping. Galactus arrives. So first of all, the bad news. Plan A goes up in smoke because they did create all these awesome teleportation devices, again, to teleport the Earth away from Galactus, but in comes the Silver Surfer and she destroys them one at a time, going around the world, wiping them off the face of the map. But before she destroys the final one in New York, Johnny is there waiting for her, and he communicates with her in her own language. In fact, we learn her origin, that she used to be a mother, and she sacrificed herself so that her daughter could live on, and she became Galactus's herald. So that's probably why she didn't like this idea of sacrificing Franklin, a child. She was a mother herself. Then Johnny confronts her with all the death she's caused on all those planets. And finally, she gets a bit of a change of heart. She decides she's no longer going to help Galactus. She suggests that they all leave now, and she leaves as well. But there's no way Reed and Sue would do that, right? They've said they're going to help save the Earth. In fact, Sue says, we're not giving up. We're going to find a solution. And then it hits Reed. We can use that final teleportation device, the one that wasn't destroyed, and instead of teleporting the Earth away, they can teleport Galactus away. Very, very far away. But how will they lure him there? And Sue comes up with the idea. We use Franklin as bait. Oh, yeah. And everybody's like, I hate that plan. That's a bad plan. That's a stupid plan. But it's all they got. They have no other choice. So Reed and Sue go off to talk about it, to emotionally prepare themselves for what's ahead. Ben's like, wow, they've been gone a long time. And it turns out Sue is right there, surprises Johnny. And man, that would be so creepy to have someone that can turn invisible and do that to you whenever they want. And then they reveal the rest of their plan, and that is that they need the help of Harvey Elder himself, the Mole Man. And the dude is so hilarious in these scenes. But basically, they work with him to take everyone in New York down to Subterranea so that, they don't get smushed when Galactus shows up. All right, so now they set poor little baby Franklin down right there on the teleporter as bait. And notice it's very wintry outside. We're now in a winter time frame for sure. And now, finally, Galactus arrives. He steps down on Earth and starts to walk around. We see his shadow there from the trailers, staring at the Statue of Liberty. I think that's so hilarious. Thank goodness, no smoke cloud this time. We get an actual Galactus, and he looked amazing. All right, so now it's time for Galactus to take a stroll through town. Notice everything is boarded up because people are all hiding down in Subterranea, and it's a good thing they are because Galactus is punting buses and exploding taxis. It's mass hysteria, right? But luckily, they're all down there, safe, or so they hope. So as Galactus is strolling through town, they want to lure him in. So they're basically waiting for Galactus to get close enough to the transporter, and then at the last second, they blind him. So the thing says, light him up, Johnny, and sure enough, Johnny shoots him in the eyes, temporarily blinding him, and while they do that, Reed Richards swaps out the real Franklin for a fake one, while the Human Torch then drops Franklin safely off at the Baxter building. However, Galactus is suspicious. He's just about to step foot into where the transporter is, and he's like, why are you all just standing there? This just does not seem right. So he scans and realizes, nope, Franklin has been moved to the Baxter building, so that's where I'm headed now. So now they have a frantic attempt to try to stop him from getting to Franklin. Ben whacks him with this truck. Reed jumps at him with this giant stick, which we all thought this was something special, like a special rod. Nope, it was just a giant stick. But he shoves it into those holes on Galactus's back where he absorbs energy, and that actually hurts Galactus. But not as much as this hurts Reed. Oh man, this was so painful to watch. Look at Galactus just smirking as he stretches and stretches Reed. Oh, so painful. But the good news for Reed is it's finally clobbering time because Johnny is carrying Ben in his arms as he says, what time is it, Ben? And Ben's like, no. And he's like, say it. And sure enough, he says it right as he smacks Galactus and frees Reed. But Galactus is undeterred. He continues heading towards the Baxter building. You can see it there in the distance. And I love that he just smacks these buildings as he walks along. And then he finally reaches the Baxter building, looks in. Poor little Herbie. He's got to be scared. And who wouldn't be if you saw this looking in at you? So Galactus brings little Franklin out and says, you are my salvation, my deliverance from this vicious hunger. But this is where Sue really levels up. She uses her invisibility powers to slow down Galactus, and she literally uses every ounce of strength she has so that the rest of the team can jump in to save Franklin. In fact, notice, actually Reed has rips on his outfit from when he got stretched by Galactus. But nonetheless, he's able to get in there, grab Franklin, and save him. And then Sue is able to use every ounce of strength she has to push Galactus back. But then notice Galactus is hanging onto this building for dear life, but not for long, because Ben knocks all the supports out from the building and Galactus finally falls into the portal. And it looks like he is finally gone for good. However, he then reaches back one last time and they need a final push to get him in. So then I thought this was wild. Johnny was literally ready to sacrifice himself and push Galactus in the portal. Maybe he listened to that track number 24, that Colt song, too many times, right? But instead, it's the Silver Surfer to the rescue. She pushes Johnny out of the way and she boots Galactus into the portal, sacrificing herself in the process. But then the team learns the terrible news. The strain of the attack on Galactus has actually killed Sue. But look who comes to rescue. That is little baby Franklin, who uses his power cosmic to bring her back to life. And I've heard it compared to the look that we saw in Star-Lord's eyes in Guardians 2. But I don't know, I think it's different because it's Franklin's cosmic power flowing through Sue, and it was celestial power flowing through Star-Lord. So let me know your thoughts on that, but I really think this is different. But anyway, Franklin's so happy because he brought Mommy back to life, and Sue says he's not us, he's more. Wow. I cannot wait to see what they're going to do with Franklin when he shows up in Secret Wars. But anyway, celebrating the victory now, the crowd goes wild, right? They all come out to celebrate because Galactus is gone. I mean, he's not dead, that's the key, nor is the Surfer, but wherever they are, they don't have their ship anymore, which I guess is orbiting around the Earth now. And so it'll be a long, long time before they return. And then we move to the 5-year anniversary celebration for the Fantastic Four. They're once again on the Ted Gilbert Show, and they're provided with this onesie for Franklin with a 5 on it. And Sue's like, no, we're not doing that. But once again, Ted Gilbert says, please welcome the Fantastic Four. But this time, we have Ben with a beard, and we have little baby Franklin in Reed's arms. So I think this scene was meant to be a callback to the 4th anniversary show when they had to rush out, but of course that was cut from the movie. But anyway, here they are rushing out. Notice Ben is pushing little Franklin in the stroller, and first they have to get the car seat in before they can go into action. And notice up on the marquee, by the way, celebrating 5 years of the Fantastic Four. All right, so that's the end of the Galactus Arrives scene grouping. But now I'm going to switch over to the scene groupings I used in my timeline video because that includes the post-credit scene. So we jump 4 years later, and we see that Sue is now reading to no longer baby Franklin, but she's reading The Hungry Caterpillar. And yeah, we can now see that he's 4 years old. So then Sue gets up asking Herbie, have you seen the book Franklin loves? And of course, he grabs The Origin of Species. Oh my word, she's reading The Origin of Species to a 4-year-old. That shows how smart he is. And that might also hint to the fact that he's a mutant, so we'll see if they end up going that direction. But Sue's like, nope, I want another one. I want this one because it looks like it might be a little more fun. But as she walks back over, she senses someone else is there, so she activates her powers, and sure enough, she turns around to see Dr. Doom himself. And here's a little clearer image of it. He's got his mask off, which is interesting, and Franklin is touching his face. Now, is he doing that because he's fascinated by the scars on Dr. Doom's face? Or is he actually healing the scars on his face? And this raises the obvious question of, is this Dr. Doom from this universe or from another universe? Now, I tend to think he's from this universe because I think they're going to want a past history between Reed and Victor. But let me know your thoughts on that. But let's now move to the post-credit scene from the Thunderbolts, because I want to tie these two post-credit scenes together if possible. So remember, Yelena is saying now there's some huge space crisis and no one's telling us about it, and then an unidentified craft enters orbit, so they use the satellite image to populate, and sure enough, it's an extra-dimensional ship entering the atmosphere, and it's got the Fantastic Four logo on it. And then we see Yelena, well, looking pretty much as confused as we are, right? So I don't have a lot of answers at this point, but I do have a lot of questions. So first of all, is this even the same ship that we saw during the movie? As many people have pointed out, in the movie, it had 3 fins. But in this post-credit scene in the Thunderbolts, it has 4. Next question, who is in the ship? Is it the Fantastic Four or is it Dr. Doom? Maybe along with Franklin Richards. And then regardless of who's in the ship, why did they arrive in 616? And will we ever return back to 828 again during Doomsday? So I'm going to do more videos trying to answer and theorize on these questions, but I would love to know your thoughts as well. What is going on here? How do we tie together the Fantastic Four and the Thunderbolts post-credit scenes? So, now we need to talk about the second post-credit scene, which was just pretty much more of that Fantastic Four cartoon we saw earlier in the movie. I love all their hands going together, an homage to Fantastic Four #1 when they did that, although now we see Herbie in there too. And then they fight tons of villains in this. I mean, we see Dragon Man, we see Claw, we see the Red Ghost, actually being voiced this time by John Malkovich, and then we see the Mole Man, the Wizard, the Puppet Master, and Diablo. And then finally, we end with the four of them there. And I love that Reed Richards has the mustache, has Pedro's mustache, right? And then Herbie reaches up and turns off the TV. So it's just a fun little scene paying off an earlier joke. But now we need to talk about things we didn't see in the movie. We didn't get a Council of Reeds. I'm bummed. I mean, maybe we'll still get one, but in the comics, it's Reed Richards from across the multiverse meeting together to try to solve big problems. And of course, we could easily have a Council of Reeds. There's been a bunch of them, so maybe, just maybe, it'll still happen. And then also, we didn't get the reference to the Watcher helping a Reed Richards. So obviously it wasn't this Reed Richards, it must have been a different one, or maybe it's still yet to come. But yeah, in What If Season 3, they alluded to him helping Reed Richards, Nick Fury, and of course, Madison, the GOAT. So yeah, kind of a bummer, but maybe it'll get paid off down the road. In fact, speaking of down the road, the movie ends by telling us the Fantastic Four will return in Avengers Doomsday. Cannot wait, cannot wait. So there you go. That is my breakdown and review of the Fantastic Four movie. So make sure to let me know what you thought about the movie and let me know if I missed any Easter eggs. You know I love to read and respond to everything. And don't forget, we have that July contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook. And there's the membership option in case you're interested in that. And I always love to mention the Discord. Here we are in the metaphysics section trying to figure out everything we learned from this crazy movie. Plus, I mentioned I would talk about the Doomsday Countdown Watch on the Discord. Every day listed here at 7 p.m. Eastern, we'll watch a different movie or show as we approach the December 18th, 2026 release of Doomsday. So we have 2,300 members across the globe, conversations 24/7, and I'll leave a pinned comment so you can join. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, the ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.